Hi, I'm Ashton, and welcome to another Patches and Parley. My makeup looks like a mess. I've had it on for a while. I filmed another video today. That will be the last video that you saw. I've since had dinner and played a lot of Trivial Pursuit, so my makeup came off, or my lipstick. I took my lipstick off because I had pasta. Today I will be beginning to sew my back patch onto my denim vest. I designed and painted this back patch myself. I have other videos detailing that, which will be in the Patches and Parley playlist if you are interested. So I'm going to cut some of this and begin. If you are new here or you have not joined me in a Patches and Parley before, Patches and Parley is a series I do where I do something generally DIY. Oftentimes it's sewing patches onto something, which is where it got its namesake, and then parley is a word that means like a debate or a discussion about something usually controversial. So that is what I do. I usually talk about politics or something queer related, and today I'm talking about both. As you may or may not have gleaned from the title, I'm going to be discussing identity politics within leftist spaces and what that means and why I think some people are against it, as well as like a couple of my theories on why and stuff. I don't know, there's a few different things that I want to talk about. We'll see how much I get to before it gets too late, because it's already like 10 and I don't know, maybe I'll get tired, maybe I won't. We will see. But, you know, this is something that I like talking about because it's something that's important to me as a marginalized person within leftist spaces. But there are some people within leftist spaces that some of us would term class reductionists. We will get into all of that a little bit and more. So I guess I'm just gonna start talking because I already have. I guess I want to start with where this idea came from. People have asked me to talk about identity politics a handful of times. It is, however, something with like a large reach, I suppose. Like, identity politics impacts a lot of different things, and it's difficult to make just one video on them because they are like, they're more than one thing. Like, you could talk about, you know, housing rights or animal welfare, and that could be one video, but like identity politics is a large branch of politics that deals with many different intersecting identities, as it were. So it's not something that you can really just fully cover, which is why I'm limiting this video to identity politics within leftist spaces, because some people don't like them. Other people think they're good. Other people, like me, have issues with both sides of the discussion, and kind of just form their own viewpoints. So I actually wanted to start this video with a comment that I got on my Leftist Lit 101 video, where I kind of go over some like baseline leftist text that I think beginning leftists would do well to read, and talk about the accessibility of all of them and other resources that you can use when you're getting into leftism and want to start reading leftist literature. It's a video that I don't want to say like proud of, that sounds conceited, but it's a video that I think is well researched and I think is well like edited, and it's one that I like that I made. So I'm going to pull that comment up if you give me a moment, which means I have to move my jacket. Actually, that's very inconvenient, but I'll do it for you. A lot of the comments on this video were really like positive and helpful, suggesting other leftist books to newcomers, or saying like, oh, I'm new to leftism, this video helped me, whatever. Like, there are good comments on this video, so I don't want to seem like I'm, you know, cherry picking, but this brings up an interesting point, I think. This comment is from someone that I'm not going to name, but it was left 7 months ago, and it says, I have a better idea. Marx Kapital 1, 2, and 3. Other topic. Okay, we'll start there. Marx's Kapital 1, 2, and 3. I have read the first volume of Marx's Kapital. I talk about it in this video, so clearly this person didn't even watch this video, but I digress. I talk about in this video how Marx's Kapital is long, wordy, in-depth, very difficult to read, which is why I didn't recommend it to beginner leftists. And I don't think that when you're beginning to get into leftist politics, you're going to want to pick up these 3 giant volumes by Marx. That's some heavy reading. I'm not saying like you're not smart enough for that, but they are like large books and might not be the best introductions to leftist ideology. There are YouTubers that have done really good like overviews of Das Kapital and like in ways that is easier to consume and can give you the same ideas. So first of all, I think it's kind of elitist and just a weird suggestion to say that you should just read Marx's Kapital, like all 3 of them. I don't know, I think that's a bit weird. Other topic, identity politics on the left is garbage. It alienated huge parts of the working class from the left, now they vote for fascists. All the left cares about today is a tiny minority of people that literally no one else cares about and portrays them as an oppressed group. It's just stupid. Like I said earlier, I'm not someone that is like very pro identity politics because I do think there are some issues with them, and I'm not someone who's like super duper against them because I do think they bring some really, really good points to the table and important points to consider, which I believe this person's kind of leaving out. So they start with, it alienated huge parts of the working class from the left, and now they vote for fascists. So there's a lot of like working theories, right, of why the working class will vote for fascists. And in the US, which is the perspective where I'm coming from, I'm actually currently reading a book called The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Really, really good. Would definitely recommend it. But it discusses a little bit of this issue. It goes on a little bit later into race, but I'm bringing it back up here because a lot of why working class people, especially working class white people, will vote for fascists or more right-aligned people is because the elite class uses identity politics against the lower class. You know, and this is something that's been going on for ages. And like, in that sense, this person does have a point. The governing class does in fact use identity politics in the sense of bigotry to influence the working class vote. This happens especially in rural white communities where they will vote for racists. It's difficult to describe, and I would definitely recommend that you read The New Jim Crow. It's not like entirely related to this, but it is tangentially related, and I would recommend it anyway. Politicians will use anything they can to get the most votes they can. This happens on the right and the left. But when it comes to the right, they will use racism to their advantage, which is, in a sense, identity politics. A lot of the anger of so-called conservatives and working class people is misdirected, right? And a lot of that is misdirected through political manipulation. A lot of lower class and working class white people are racist or have a lot of internalized racism because they're taught that Black people, Hispanic people, are to blame for their poorness when in fact capitalism is to blame for their poorness. And this is something that so many leftists have discussed, and that's important, even though it has to do with identity politics. So this person's mentioning like identity politics alienates huge parts of the working class. And that's true, but not because of the left. It's because of the way that the right uses identity politics in a bigoted way. I mean, like it or not, class is not the only identity that matters when it comes to politics. Race, especially in the United States, is a giant factor. So is gender, so is sexuality, so is, you know, dozens upon dozens of other things. But a lot of like anti-left sentiment from lower and working class people is not actual anti-left sentiment. It's actually a lot of the times misplaced anger. That's something that a lot of leftists have theorized about. That's something that I agree with. They're blaming the fact that a lot of lower class people vote right-leaning on the left, when in fact it's the manipulation of the right and the way that they use identity politics in a negative way to convince them to vote right. And I'm not saying that the right uses identity politics in a good way. I'm saying that they use them in a manipulative way. It's not good to exploit the internalized racism of lower class people to convince them to vote right-leaning. But it happens, and it's something that I think leftists need to talk about instead of saying, oh, the working class just doesn't vote left anymore because of identity politics, because the left is so wrapped up in identity politics. It doesn't make sense to me to blame the working class for voting right because they just don't understand identity politics or that identity politics are alienating to them. Because I've found that a lot of lower class people are actually open to discussing identity politics. It's just not necessarily something they understand. And it's very easy for a right-leaning leader like the person currently in office to manipulate the inherent like bigotry that a lot of people hold. Not just the lower class, not just the working class, everybody. This person goes on to say that identity politics makes a tiny minority of people portrayed as an oppressed group. And they go on to list some oppressed identities as like gay, queer, Black, female. I don't think I'm misinterpreting this, but this person seems to be implying that gay people, people of color, women, are not oppressed whatsoever, which I think is like provably false. But I also think it kind of exemplifies a like gap in this person's theory, right? If you've only read Marx, like Marx does only take really class into account. And Marx is, you know, someone that I've read, someone that a lot of my ideologies are informed by, but he's not the end-all be-all. And I think reading only this one political philosopher that focuses only on class, it broaden your horizons a bit, buddy. There's so many other people out there. Anyways, he says that the minorities, nobody cares about them, and that they're just portrayed as an oppressed group. And I think the thing that this person is overlooking here is that marginalized identities play a large part in class structure. Obviously, a lot of leftism was built on class consciousness and critiques of class structure. But it's really important to recognize that a lot of the times today, big portions of lower class people are people of color, are queer. That kind of thing isn't a coincidence. The oppression that those people face isn't fake, isn't made up. Class is a large overarching factor between multiple different minority groups. It's estimated that up to 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ. There are more Black men in prison than there are in college, and that's not an accident. Again, there's like way too much even for me to go into in this video about either of those things. Being queer, being a person of color, both of those things are historically marginalized identities that really impact class. Again, if you want to learn more about mass imprisonment of Black people, I would definitely recommend The New Jim Crow. It's very good. I'm almost done. I think I can say that at this point. It's good. Would recommend. The disenfranchisement of so many marginalized people, whether it's Black people, whether it's queer people, whether it's disabled people, oftentimes those marginalized identities and the fact that a lot of us are lower class, those two things aren't separable. Those two things don't exist separately from each other. A lot of queer youth are kicked out of their homes. A lot of Black people go through the school to prison pipeline and can't escape because it's a fucking corrupt and disgusting system. Disabled people go into huge amounts of medical debt. Single mothers lose their jobs because maternity leave is just not provided. And those are all class issues, but they're also identity politic issues. And we can't just pretend to not see one or the other because it's not something that we're familiar with or have experience with. You know, identity politics and class consciousness are often talked about as two completely separate issues, but they're not. And I think everybody that aligns himself on the left, everyone that considers himself like, you know, a leftist, someone that's class conscious, you should recognize that a vast majority of marginalized identities and marginalized people are poor, are lower class, because of the combination of capitalism and their marginalized identities. One doesn't negate the other. And sure, there are a lot of queer people and people of color and disabled people that do like push for assimilationism. That's not what everyone is fighting for. That's not what I want to fight for. And the truth is, I see a lot more assimilationist gays coming over the more radical side than I do the other way around. And maybe that's biased because of the communities I'm in, but you get my point. Okay, to address their next point, this person says, no wonder that people like Jeff Bezos support the LTGBQ, weird acronym, but alright, community. He even got an award for this. At least you have powerful buddies. You all know at this point, if you've been watching me, I have an immense hatred for Jeff Bezos. And I think this brings up an interesting idea of like how class and identity politics are two sometimes separate issues, because there are people that are way too high class, such as Bezos, who pretend to support marginalized communities. Like, for example, Bezos and LGBT people, right? But it raises the question of like, does he actually, you know? Because you can say one thing and you can make tiny, tiny donations to however many, you know, nonprofits that you want. And Amazon is one of those giant corporations that does contribute to the disenfranchisement of millions of people. And it's important to recognize that a disproportionate amount of those people are LGBT, are Black, are disabled. I'm not trying to say that like Bezos is a homophobe, but what I am trying to say is that nobody that high class can exist and truly support everyone's rights, because capitalism is inherently exploitative of the lower class, and the lower class disproportionately contains oppressed people, oppressed minorities, not just money-wise. Obviously, I'm not speaking for every gay trans boy out there, but I do not see Bezos as an ally, because for me, my queerness is radical, and my identity and my politics overlap and intersect a lot. And I don't believe he can be an ally because of his class. I don't like him. I refuse to take him as an ally. I don't care if he got an award. Fuck Jeff Bezos. Support from him, support from corporations in general. I've done a whole video about rainbow capitalism. Like, that kind of thing is performative. It's not actually helping marginalized people. I don't think that he supports LGBT people because he genuinely has this passion for marginalized identities, because I don't think he does, because he's mega filthy rich. I think what he's doing is using that and using, like, I don't hate gay people as a way to take the focus away from his massive wealth. When high class and elite people like Bezos, like really, really rich politicians and stuff, say things like gay rights, they're not saying that because they actually want to fight for disenfranchised people. They're saying that because it is slowly becoming the more popular opinion. It's becoming a generally perceived good thing to support marginalized identities, and that's not bad, but people of a really high class can use that to distract from the fact that they're high class and that they're contributing to the oppression of these people, whether or not they realize it. And I think that's something that we need to talk about, because there are a lot of gay people that don't recognize that. There are a lot of queer people that do play into rainbow capitalism. And I'm not saying that they're bad gays, I'm just saying that a lot of them are misguided. And, you know, I was that way at some point as well. If Bezos went to a pride parade, right, which is one of the, like, largest modern celebrations of marginalized identities, whatever. If he went to a pride parade, do you think he would be there to support his queer trans man best friend? Do you think he would be there to talk about the importance of police brutality within LGBT plus communities? Or do you think he would be there to promote his own product, to say, Amazon loves you, to, you know, shout about how great he is and how great his products are and how great his business is? Because I think I know which one it is. Mainstream support for marginalized identities doesn't mean that the fight for equality for us is over. It means that it's becoming more mainstream. And sure, overall that might be a good thing, but it does mean that capitalism is going to get all mixed up in there. And it does mean that big boy capitalists like Bezos are going to use marginalized identities for their own benefit. That is what Bezos is doing. That is what people like Warren Buffett, Elon Musk, whoever else, that's what those people are doing. They aren't tangibly or monetarily showing support for disabled folks, LGBT folks, for incarcerated people, for neurodivergent people, for brown people, for black people, for Asian people, for, you know, any sort of marginalized identity. They don't care about us. They care about maintaining the wealth that they have, and one way they can do that is play into popular social movements, whether or not they actually care about them. I think a more concise way of saying this is when billionaires and millionaires play into progressive social ideas, they aren't doing that because they believe in a fight for social justice or civil rights or anything like that. They're doing that to maintain a position that they have, to maintain the class structure that we have, right? Because they want to look good to the majority of people. If they support those socially equitable movements, then they're making themselves look slightly better. They're giving themselves a bit of relief from any anger that would be towards them because of their class. Obviously, I don't know every single billionaire personally, but I'm telling you this is a trend, and it's an important one. And that's why I try to bridge that gap a lot of the times, because I feel like more LGBT plus people, because that's the majority of my audience, needs to recognize that big corporations don't care about you. The disenfranchisement of LGBT people, of people of color, of immigrants, of disabled people, of neurodivergent people, that's not an accident. That is by design. By design of what? Capitalism. Was that a tangent? I can't tell, but I think I'm making some decent points, so we're just gonna keep talking. I think what I was saying is that this person does bring up a good point. Class is a very different signifier than other types of identities, because class is the main thing that capitalism creates. But we need to recognize that capitalism uses other historically marginalized identities to reinforce this class structure, to manipulate lower classes, and this divide can be difficult to bridge because there are some leftists that are class reductionists and really want to fight for the lower class people. You know, I'm very passionate about class struggle. I talk about it a lot. I bring it up in every goddamn essay I've ever written, but that doesn't mean that I ignore the plights of other types of identities that are marginalized, because that oftentimes interacts with class. Class is this very large overarching factor that is used to marginalize people, used to keep people marginalized and keep people that are previously marginalized by class silent by using the oppression and the dynamics of other types of identities to keep them marginalized, because politicians help them misplace that fear, right? That's what I was talking about at the beginning of the video. Full circle, baby. So, to an extent, this person is right that class and race, gender, sexuality, ability status, neurodivergence, all those things are different, and class is kind of in a different house of its own when it comes to the way that it's constructed, but they interact a lot, and they use each other and they play off of each other to create more power structures. And in my eyes, to be a leftist, you should be fighting against all of those power structures, not just the one that's been written about by Marx. And I think this is almost like further proven when you get involved in leftist spaces. Food Not Bonds provides food, it's in the name, but also like hygiene supplies, clothes, medical supplies sometimes, like plenty of different things. And if you work with them, you will notice pretty quickly that a lot of the people that need those supplies are not white, are not straight, are not cis. A lot of people that are disenfranchised aren't just poor. They're people that are coming out of incarceration. They're people that were kicked out of their homes because they're queer. They're people that fought a lot of different forms of oppression, not just class struggle. Like Marx's Capital, fine, good, read it, do what you want. But it's not the end-all be-all of leftism. Like, yeah, there are poor, cis-het white people, but those aren't the only people that the left should be fighting for. I think that it's really important to recognize that marginalized identities outside of class exist and are marginalized and should be considered when we're discussing leftist politics, because they compound upon each other, because the right uses them to divide people, because the right uses them to push people further right. All right, I went on a long time about that one, but moving on to this next point, identity politics on the left has no class content in it. This is a valid critique. However, I don't know why this person's applying it to me, because I'm a neurodivergent, queer, disabled person. As someone that's pretty heftily involved in identity politics, I also am a big fan of class consciousness. I tell all my friends to read the Communist Manifesto. You think that's a joke? It's not a joke. A lot of LGBT people, especially LGBT POC, talk about the white cis gays and how they are, very high up that privilege ladder in some ways, and oftentimes end up playing into the oppression of the rest of the LGBT plus community. So yeah, a lot of people that care about identity politics do lack a sort of class consciousness, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't give them ways of educating themselves. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to do some outreach. It feels like this commenter is kind of trying to push marginalized people away from the left because he doesn't want us there. One of my personal theories is that a lot of people come into the left through one of two ways. One of them is through class consciousness, and one of them is through identity politics. Personally, I came in through identity politics. I was definitely a fan of gay rights and free healthcare before I was a fan of anti-fascism, anti-capitalism, and before I read a single page of Marx's Capital. I'm sorry I keep bringing that up. I just think it's really funny that this person thinks that you should just read these giant volumes of really wordy books and then you're automatically a leftist. I fully acknowledge that there was a portion of my life where I didn't know that much about class because I grew up relatively privileged despite being a trans person, and I will recognize that. I'll be the first one to say it. But I've talked a bit about how listening to anarcho-punk helped me discover more leftist ideologies, and it did, that's true. But even just existing on the internet and exposing myself to more and more left-leaning content helped me get into leftism. I'm not going to go to the really, really free market and interview people okay, listen, did you fight for gay rights first or for anti-fascism first? Discuss. That'd be a shitty thing to do. It would be gatekeeping. It would be pushing people out of leftism, and that's not a goal that I have. I don't know if that's a goal that this person has, but I don't think it's necessarily a good or realistic goal that helps anybody. Sure, there are some aspects of identity politics that have no class consciousness left. The fight for gay marriage is...
Emma Goldman's essay on marriage and love is also a really, really good starting point for thinking about this, and I will also link that down below.
There's a discussion within many, many different LGBT communities about liberation versus, just pure acceptance and assimilationism, and that's a discussion that I've participated in many times, and one that oftentimes I feel like I've changed people's minds. And I think that's an important thing to have within LGBT communities because it does help bring people to the left. Is that not what this person wants? Does this person want to exclude LGBT people from the left because they just don't think we're radical enough? I do not know. that seems to be the case. So if you're getting your representation of disabled people, of LGBT plus people, of people of color, of immigrants from popular media, you're going to see a different image than the people that you see when you go to an anti-capitalism market, when you go to like a zine fest, when you go to a house show, right? Next sentence that I want to dissect from this comment: the rich elites don't give a shit if CEOs are homosexual, queer, or black, or female, or whatever, so long as these people make a profit. Once again, I think this person has a good point. However, this brings up the discussion of exceptionalism, right? And this is something that I read about in another book on race that I read recently that I would also recommend. It's called So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma Aluro. It discusses a little bit the idea of black exceptionalism, and a lot of people will say, you know, racism is over because blah 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 person is famous. Like, what about, you know, Oprah Winfrey? What about Michael Jordan? Both of which are billionaires, believe it or not. That doesn't mean that racism doesn't exist. That just means that there are a select few people who have gotten lucky, managed to exploit capitalism, and come out with billions of dollars. That doesn't make them good. That also doesn't mean that racism is over, because when you look at the overall general trends, mass incarceration still exists. Police brutality is still a giant issue. Anti-blackness is still a big issue. Racism against Indigenous people, racism against Latinx people, racism against Asian people, especially right now, all those things are still issues, and the fact that there are 1 or 2 billionaires that represent those minorities, that doesn't mean that every single black person is a billionaire. That doesn't mean that we should exclude poor black people from the people that we help. So sure, to this person's point, a lot of big capitalist entities and large corporations don't care as like individual corporations, whether you're LGBT+, whether you're a woman, whether you're disabled, whether you're neurodivergent, or if you're Indigenous, they don't care about that specifically. However, there are still so many systems in place that do prevent marginalized people from climbing that capitalist ladder. Now, that's a whole other discussion, because I and most leftists don't think that that capitalism ladder should exist in the first place, and that's why black exceptionalism is kind of a symptom of the problem, because racists and, you know, people with a lot of internalized racism can point to rich black people as success stories and as, oh, don't you want to look up to that? When like black liberation, queer liberation, stuff like that, that doesn't lie on succeeding under capitalism. Because when it comes to radical politics and identity politics intersecting, we don't want marginalized people to succeed under capitalism. We want to have a different system where there's no marginalization in the first place. We don't want to exist and thrive despite of being marginalized. We want to eliminate that marginalization in the first place. Does that make sense? That person's final sentence in this comment was, "Please, go back under the stone from which you emerged." Elegant insult, but to that I say, oh my god, it gets lost in my hair. Get it? It's a rock. I'm under it. Get it? It's very funny. Insulting people and preemptively dismissing their arguments is not a great way to encourage unity on the left, which is something a lot of leftists say that they won't. But queer people, Indigenous people, Black people, Latinx people, Asian people, disabled people, neurodivergent people, incarcerated people, poor people, anti-fascists, anti-racists, revolutionaries. We're all here to stay, and a lot of us fall into multiple of those categories, and it's kind of silly to say that class is the only one that matters when multiple different marginalized identities contribute to the class structure that we currently have and are used by elites to further perpetuate that class structure and the hatred that exists within it. I do think that the failures of identity politics are important to recognize. You know, there's the big neoliberal idea of we need a woman president, and then there's the more leftist idea that we don't need any presidents, and it doesn't matter if the president is a woman if she still is gonna do war crimes. And I think this person brings up some arguments that are kind of common amongst leftists or people that are economically left. And there are a lot of people that fight for social justice and don't also fight for economic justice. I don't think those people are necessarily morally corrupt. I just think a lot of them are misguided and misunderstand a few basic ideas, right? But that doesn't mean that they can't learn. That doesn't mean that they can't change. Identity politics on the left are a large discussion point, and I'm sure that I didn't answer every question that this person has. I'm sure that I didn't, convince some people that it's an important thing to discuss. Not every person who considers themselves a liberal is like super down for taking down the bourgeoisie, but I think it's an important discussion, and I'm glad that I talked about it because I've been thinking about this comment for 7 months. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I've been talking for a long time, and it's like 11 p.m., so I do at some point have to take off my makeup, and I want to call my boyfriend, and I don't really want to talk more about, like, people on the left that are bigoted and people that blame poor people voting right on the fact that identity politics exist, and those identities are important and contribute to the marginalization of a lot of people. So I hope I got my points across as well as I could. I know this is like a more political discussion than I sometimes have, and probably more than some of you bargained for, but here you are. Thank you for watching. Thanks for hearing me out. If you're white, read those 2 books I recommended. If you're not a leftist, or if you don't know what leftism means, but you're here because you're trans and I'm trans, hello. I have a video introducing you to some leftist literature, and even though this person didn't like it, I promise you, you don't have to read all 3 volumes of Marx's Capital to get into leftism. And if you're Jeff Bezos, fuck you. You do need to read all 3 volumes of Marx's Capital, okay? I'm gonna go talk to my boyfriend because I'm gay, and the fact that I fight for gay liberation doesn't mean that I'm not still a leftist. Here's how far I got on the back patch. I went from here to here, so, making progress. I'm hopefully gonna finish this tomorrow or the day after. This is a very easy thing to do when multitasking. I've been getting into audiobooks recently. I definitely recommend the app Libby. You can connect to your local libraries on there and check out audiobooks. Been very helpful for me during quarantine because I can't go to the actual library. Goodbye, comrades. I hope that someday I see you at the guillotining party of Jeff Bezos, and I will talk to you later, maybe.